Hey, you. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, gear, the right way, with God Almighty at the center, Judeo-Christian values, real-world, first-hand experience. Saddle up for today's episode of Gunfighter Life. Today's discussion, maximizing your handgun for survival. Maximizing your handgun for survival. Now, to me, survival encompasses two major capabilities. That road kind of bifurcates into defense and hunting. Defense and hunting. Now, without getting too far off on a tangent, a tangential line of reasoning, for either one of those, usually, a long gun is going to be a better choice. If you're elk hunting, a scope 30-06 is going to be a better choice. If it's for most defensive situations, a 12 gauge with buckshot is going to be a better choice. That said, what if what you have is a handgun? What if for whatever reason, your bug out bag, your bug out plan, you're on the road, and what you have on you is a handgun? How do you maximize your handgun for survival? And what makes a good survival handgun? I would say in any kind of disaster scenario, the handgun's primary role will be the same that it is for most of us day to day. If you're listening, hopefully you conceal carry or carry a handgun day to day. This will likely be its primary role in a disaster situation too. Concealed, highly mobile, personal protection. There are some considerations that you may want to take into account when thinking about a handgun for survival. Both the commonality of the design and the robustness of the design. It's dealing with austere environments, its reliability. And whether you like it or not, I think the de facto caliber of our defensive handgun caliber of our time right now is 9mm by far. And I think it's a good choice, and I think there's good reasons for that. I'm not saying you have to have one of those, but they're by far most common. If I'm recommending a handgun for survival, I'm going to recommend a good, proven, hopefully battle-proven design. Kind of my de facto go-to survival handgun is a Wilson Combat Beretta 92. No safety, decocker only. And a big reason for that is it's a battle-proven design. Also, they're not super uncommon. A Beretta 92, 92FS, most of those parts have commonality, and it is super rare that any of those parts need any kind of maintenance. They are known for going to high round counts. They are known for being very reliable, and one of the reasons I like the Beretta, they are crazy accurate. My other top choice for this would be the SIG 226 and or 229. I like a full-length barrel, a lot of advantages, so I would go the 226 over it. Actually, that's my concealed carry gun right now. I'm CCWing a Sig Sauer 226 single action only with a Trijicon RMR on it. The 226 likewise is known and respected as a battle-proven, combat handgun. Both of those would be good choices. Your Glock also would be a decent choice if you are familiar with and trained with a Glock. Glocks have a little bit of peculiarity and quirks, mostly an atrocious trigger in my opinion, and a funky grip angle that you kind of have to get used to with your natural point of aim. That is different than most other handguns, but it does check the box of being common and being very robust. I won't take that away from Glock. They're very simple, they're very rugged, and much like that red stapler from Office Space with a similar kind of trigger pull, they just seem to hang around through a lot of stuff. So, yeah. The Glock also would be a good choice, and I'm not saying they're the only choices, but I would stick to common proven platforms for this. There are other good guns that I probably wouldn't choose, like a Canic. Canics work. They're a decent gun, especially for the money, but they're not as proven, especially the newer designs. And you're probably not finding a lot of spare parts for the Canic, right? So they're not common. That's just an example. I'm not saying that the Canic is a bad gun. In fact, I've done a whole episode on the Canic Rival. It's a decent gun, but I wouldn't choose it for this application. For getting into competition shooting, yeah, sure. Rock on. It's a good gun, especially for the money. I still don't think it would be my choice, but that would be a good one for that application, not for this application. So assuming you've chosen one of those, modern, 9mm, double stack, handguns, how do we then maximize it for survival? Well, much like duty use, I would put, if you're not running an optic, I would put good night sights on it. And by night sights, what I like to run is a high visibility day or night front sight and a flat black rear. If your fundamentals are sound, I find really no advantage into the 3-dot sight system. In fact, I find many disadvantages to it, like a flat black sight. And if your fundamentals are sound, I really see no advantage and many disadvantages to having illuminated rear sights at nighttime. So I would have a front sight, night sight, and a flat black rear. That's me. Different choices for different people like different things. But I'd have good usable iron sights. Now, if you are going to run an optic for survival, I can recommend only one that I'm aware of. It's the Trijicon RMR that doesn't take batteries. If you're not familiar with Trijicon, like their ACOG, their military application, scope, advanced combat optical gun sight, if I remember from my time in Iraq when they were first getting introduced in my second tour over there, I believe that's what that acronym stands for. Advanced Combat Optical Gun Sight. They made those for our M16s. They're a good, robust sight. And part of the thing that makes those robust is that they don't take batteries. They run off tritium, which is a radioactive isotope, and they run off ambient light. No batteries. I learned the hard way many times not to trust my life to things with batteries. If I'm recommending an optical sight for a handgun, I will only recommend for this application, and for me right now, for daily use and daily carry for a defensive handgun, not a training handgun, not a fun handgun, but something I'm going to trust my life to, the Trijicon RMR sans batteries. They make models that run off ambient light and that radioactive isotope of tritium. No batteries, no electronics, very, very rugged. I was once doing some training. I was doing wind sprints with my carry gun, and the gun flew out and hit a pile of rocks, dented the barrel. I replaced the barrel, landed on the optic. The optic was fine. It had a little scratch on the glass, but not in the place that bothered me, and it didn't lose zero or anything. They're rugged, the RMR. The RMR sans batteries is the only, I repeat, the only one at this time that I would recommend for this kind of hard-use survival application. Now be aware, radiation, if you're not familiar with how it works, it does have a half-life. The half-life on tritium, I'd have to look it up, but it's over a decade. So in a decade, it'll still work. It'll be like half as bright. If you've made it a decade into the apocalypse and you're still running the same gun with the same optic, I think you'll have other things that you can run after that. Even then, it will still work with ambient light, and it'll still work at night, just won't be as bright. It's a far better option to me than anything that take batteries. And I don't care how long they say the battery life on something is. That's if it continues to work and none of the electronics, the wires and stuff get messed up. And if a battery gets too hot, it can have real issues and even leak or explode. And if a battery gets too cold, it can get so cold that it stops transmitting. Hence, your red dot no longer shows up as a red dot that you can see. So keep in mind that battery life that they advertise, that's generally under optimal conditions. I would not consider a grid down post-apocalyptic scenario to be optimal conditions. What else can you do? You could put a good robust finish on your gun if it doesn't already have one. Now, like the Glock, to give credit where it's due, that Tennifer or whatever the new finish is they have that's like Tennifer, their finishes are crazy good. So the Glock Slide, it's already got a crazy good finish on it. I'm a big fan of nitride, especially I think it's called PQP. There's different processes of nitriding, but a really good nitride is a really good impervious finish. So a nitride barrel or a stainless barrel and or a stainless slide or a really good finish like Cerakote, Duracoat, Durabake, whatever, some kind of good impervious coating on your handgun, and if you want on the magazines. And what's inside the magazines. Now you're probably not going to apply this coating, although I do think they make some aftermarket stuff for reloaders. But for this, I would really look for ammunition that is good duty ammunition sealed against moisture. You'll see this in a lot of military contract ammunition, or sometimes good defensive hollow point ammunition where they either stake the primers and or apply some kind of waterproof sealant to the primers. This is the ammunition I would look for if I was having some in my baby bug out bag or my full-size bug out bag or my general duty ammo for austere environments. As I pull out my spare mag now recording this, Winchester Ranger T, 147 grain. And I'm looking at the back of the primer. It is indeed stamped in so it won't back out, and it is water sealed with some kind of sealant, and it's a really good duty ammunition. That 147 grain Winchester Ranger T is one of my go-to loads. I prefer 147. I prefer for many reasons that I won't get into. I've covered that on my go-to 9mm loads. Go check out that episode if you want. But perhaps a as good or better choice for this would be the 124 grain NATO type loadings. NATO loadings, if you don't know, are what we would consider in the U.S. kind of a plus P load. Europeans tend to load their ammunition quite a bit hotter than SAMI condones here in the U.S. So a NATO load is a good hot load. It's not the best for defense, but for this application, if you're stockpiling it, it's not a horrible load. I wouldn't recommend it for your everyday CCW load, but you could find a comparable 124 grain plus P, let's say Spear Gold Dot, and check it to make sure it shoots the same point of aim, point of impact. But you could probably find a 124 grain plus P defensive hollow point load that shoots the same point of aim, point of impact as your NATO load. But a lot of those NATO, if they're a true NATO load, then they're going to have those things, those kind of staked primers. They're going to be, made for hard use and long storage. So there's that. Also for a 9mm, something you may not often think about. I used to do this, and I don't do it much anymore, but I probably should get back into it. They do make shot shells for the 9mm. They're not the greatest. They're not great really at all for many things, but they're okay for some things. I don't think that they're going to cycle the slide in most 9mm, so they're a single shot and then fix the malfunction kind of proposition. But I think they do have some utility. You may want just a few of them. They don't weigh very much. In your bag, in your kit, in your bug out bag, in the bottom of your last magazine. They can be used to harvest very small game at very close distances. And we're talking about maximizing your handgun for survival. I just did one episode on Alpha Male Podcast. I don't know if it'll come out before or after this. But on insidious killers. Some of the biggest killers after a disaster and throughout history aren't guns and knives. They're disease and infection and viruses and rodents and the diseases and nasty things that those unclean animals carry. You may not think about it, but you may have to dispatch a rat or two in those nasty environments post an event, especially if you plan on sticking in an urban, suburban environment. With all the death and rampant lack of hygiene and sanitation, I imagine rats are going to be a big thing in most places. Give you the ability to take out a rat. In fact, it's often referred to as rat shot. Without putting a big hole in infrastructure and doing a lot of overkill. You might consider some of those 9mm shot shells for your loadout. Not all frangible rounds are created equal, but, a frangible round can make quite a good varmint round. And that's all I'm going to say about that. You may want a couple of those for that reason alone, and they do have some other applicability. talking about maximizing your handgun for survival. Special note on the Glocks, they do make the maritime spring cups. If you've seen those cool videos of Glocks shooting underwater, you might consider putting in a maritime spring cup. And you might also consider whatever gun you have, if it's your go-to gun, you might consider having a few of the small parts, or look up what parts often break on whatever model, like on a Glock, an extractor, a front sight, a trigger spring, and have some of those. They'll even fit a lot of times in the back grip of the Glock. So you may consider that for your go-to gun. Having those spare things in your bag. Your line 2 or 3 kit for your gun. Oh, and I didn't mention it because I mentioned specific models, but if it's not one of these models, these all share this in common. But if you're getting a different model, if it checks those other boxes, get one that's easy to field strip. You probably don't want to take it all the way down in this kind of environment unless you really have the time and another go-to gun, but pick a gun that's easy to field strip. And most military-made guns are. They're made for Marines and soldiers and privates to be able to field strip. So most military-type guns are going to be pretty easy to field strip, but I would check that box as well. Now, let's talk about another option, the 22. The 22 semi-automatic handgun. And I'm talking 22 long rifle for now. Again, I think the primary use is for defense, for a handgun, concealable defense. However, if you already have a good CCW gun and you want a pack handgun to go in your bug out bag as a secondary gun, to arm your spouse, to arm somebody else, or you want something better for that other option we talked about, putting food on the table, you might want a really good accurate, assuming you're a really good accurate handgun shooter, 22 reliable, super accurate handgun. 2 really come to mind, and there are others. And there are others I would recommend for training and things like that. However, the 2 that come to mind that will be best for this are the Ruger Mark series, Mark 1, 2, 3, or 4. 4, in my opinion, being the better of them for this application. So a Ruger Mark 4 or a Browning Buckmark. They're very common. They're very reliable. They check those boxes. They're very, very accurate if you know what you're doing. Unlike a lot of the ones that are made to be like modern semi-autos, these should have the sights affixed to the barrel, making them really accurate. The barrel doesn't move, the sights don't move in relation to the barrel. They can be very accurate guns. And if you're accurate enough to take advantage of that, that's a good thing. I would recommend these 2 specifically. Not saying they're the only 2, but they'd be my 2 recommendations. The 2245 Light, and I do believe, although I don't know the name off the top of my head, Browning makes some lightweight versions as well. If it's going to be a packable gun, I don't think I have to explain why that is important. There is another thing that you can do along these lines, going back to your centerfire 9mm or other caliber. A lot of common platforms like the Glock, like the Beretta 92, like a 1911, the SIG 226, and that's another advantage of getting a common platform. They all have 22 conversion kits. You can get 22 conversion kits. So instead of carrying an entire other gun, you could carry just a conversion kit, converting your gun to 22 long rifle. There's some advantages and disadvantages to this. Advantage is you're going to save on weight. You're going to be able to train with this, hopefully pre-event, right? Left of event and right of event. You'll be able to train. You'll be able to carry a lot more ammo. You'll be able to use the same trigger pull, I think in every case, as your centerfire gun. So that'll make you much better with your defensive 9mm. And you don't have to carry a whole extra frame. Some disadvantages, you only have the one gun. So you don't have an entire spare gun if your one gun goes down. In the other case, if you had an entire dedicated 22, you would have a spare gun. Unless it's one of the parts that is only on the 9mm, not part of the frame, which who knows the odds of that, then if your main gun breaks, let's say you don't have a spare trigger spring for your Glock and your Glock trigger spring breaks, then your 22 conversion is also going to have a broken trigger spring. There's some disadvantage there. Also, you can't arm another person if you want to. So it's kind of advantages and disadvantages to both. But if you get a common platform, a 22 conversion kit may be a way to really maximize that gun for survival. Let's say you want to carry, 100 rounds of 9mm and then 500 rounds of 22 long rifle and a conversion kit. That doesn't get into the realm of the ridiculous as far as weight. Then you're going to carry your bug out bag and everything you need for general bug out bag stuff and 500 rounds of 9mm. That does get into the realm of ridiculous. And if you're judicious about your 22 long rifle consumption post-event, right of event, that's a lot of meat you can put on the table with 500 rounds of 22. So there's a lot of advantages there to the 22 long rifle. There are also 22 Magnum handguns, semi-autos, the Kel-Tec PMR-30. Walther just came out with one. Here's the deal with the 22 mag. For everything you gain, you're giving up quite a bit. If it's to put food on the table, in many cases, I prefer a 22 long rifle to a 22 Magnum. It's smaller, it's a little bit lighter, and it's not going to tear up the meat as bad. If I'm shooting a mourning dove, I don't want to shoot it with a 22 Magnum. Yeah, if I'm shooting a woodchuck to get it out of my garden, I don't have a garden, but, as a scenario, for sure, I could care less how much damage I do to that woodchuck or that prairie dog. But if I'm shooting a quail to eat, yeah, I would rather shoot it with a 22 long rifle 40 grain solid. I don't want to shoot it with the 22 mag. So if your point of having the 22 is for food, there are some situations where you gain some food procurement with the 22 Magnum, but you give it up with many other things with the 22 long rifle. Also, that ammunition has a really good power to weight ratio. However, it's not nearly as affordable. That may or may not affect you or apply to you, but if you want a gun that you can also train with, it's a lot less affordable than 22 long rifle. Although, if you're talking about the main purpose of the handgun for defense, I would concede that the 22 Magnum is a better defensive round than the 22 long rifle. I'm not telling you it's a bad choice or a worse choice in 22. I'm just trying to lay out on the table soberly and circumspectly the reasons you may or may not consider it. And when we get into the 22 Magnum, that is an obvious jump in thought process for me, at least, to the 5.7. The 5.7, especially the FN, very proven, military proven gun, good power to weight ratio, carry a lot of ammo both in the pistol and in your pack. Unlike the 22 Magnum, which is a rimfire, like the 22 long rifle, it's a center fire. So it's almost certainly going to be much more reliable than your 22 long rifle or 22 Magnum. It's also quite a bit spicy. So again, we go back to game hunting. I don't know what, the common 5.7 rounds, because I don't own one, would do to small game, but I have to deduce from my understanding of ballistics and physics that it would be less desirable than a 22 long rifle for that application, but better for defense. So you may also consider a 5.7. Now let's go down another fork in the road here. What I think is one of the best all-around guns, period. In fact, if you said that I could only own one handgun ever for the rest of my life, that would make me a sad, sad gunfighter. But I also love to hunt, and I love to hunt large game with a handgun. I've been blessed to do much large game hunting with a handgun. And if we go back to food procurement and flexibility, what would be a really compelling choice, I'm not saying I would choose this, but a really compelling choice would be a medium frame 357 Magnum. Something like a Colt Python, and not because it's on The Walking Dead, because it's actually a good revolver. Something like a Colt Python, something like a Smith & Wesson Model 66 Combat Magnum, or a 686 Plus, which will give you the 7 rounds instead of the 6, but something like that, and anywhere between a 3, 4, or 5 inch barrel. A good medium frame revolver, the kind of revolver that police officers carried for a long time in this country. In fact, when I went to work for LAPD, there were still cops that carried the old wheel guns, Smith & Wessons, I think. They're a good all-around gun. Unlike common lure, I think, they do break. Revolvers absolutely do break, and when they break, it's often catastrophic. And if you've ever tried to take one completely apart, my advice is don't. Pay somebody else to do that. Not worth your frustration. Unless you're like a legit gunsmith. But they are a frustrating thing to take apart. They're like a complex watch with all the gears and widgets and sprockets and cogs inside there. There's a lot going on in a revolver. But if everything's working right, they tend to work really well, and they don't tend to have a lot of issues. A big advantage for this, if we talk about a major event, there's probably not going to be a lot of new manufacturer ammo. And as time goes on, with ammo exposed to different environments, it's going to get less reliable. A revolver, if you don't know, the immediate action in a semi-auto is tap, rack, bang, or tap, roll, rack, depending on your tactical operator vernacular. With a revolver, it's pull the trigger again. If a round doesn't go off, you pull the trigger again because it puts a new round, a fresh round, behind the barrel. It's a big advantage. Also, you're not reliant on the power of the round to make that gun function. And here's what I mean by that. Yeah, in a 9mm, you can get 115 grain going at 1,200 feet a second, or you can get a 147 going at 980. Force equals mass times the velocity squared. You can even get a little bit caliente and get a plus P. However, you can't go too far off the rails. If you go too light, the gun's not going to cycle. If you go too heavy, you risk breaking the gun, damaging the gun. So you're contingent on the amount of power in that round to reliably cycle that gun. Not so with the revolver. You can go really mild and you can go really hot. And common revolvers like 357 will also shoot other calibers, most commonly 38 special. So you can load a really, really mild, let's say the old classic solid lead 148 grain wad cutter. That's a great game getting tool. That's a great small game getting tool because it's not so high velocity. It's probably not going to destroy a lot of meat if you're talking smaller game. Also, you can go really hot. You can go all the way up to like 180 grain hard cast buffalo bore or double tap 357 Magnum load, and I would have no problem hunting anything in North America with that load. It's in fact, it's the load. One of those loads is what I have for my going to Alaska backup gun. So, yeah, you can go really hot and you can go really mild. And something that's the standard, like 125 grain 357, is a great defensive option. So you get all that flexibility with that mid-size frame 38 357. They aren't so big that you can't conceal them. You might think in the apocalypse you're just going to be open carrying, but I would say for a lot of the same reasons I don't advise open carry day to day, I wouldn't advise it right of the event because it makes you a target. If somebody's looking to shoot somebody and take their stuff, the guy with a nice shiny gun hanging out there might have some cool stuff. You shall not covet. But coveting is the beginning of many sins, I think. And don't have your gun hanging out there for everybody to covet. Also, it gives you a tactical advantage if they don't know you're armed. Or I should say it has the real potential to give you a tactical advantage if they don't know you're armed. There are some times where we want to be a hard target, and open carry is advisable, like in a security or executive protection role or something like that. There are times when it's not. That's all I'm going to say. But the medium-sized frame, without getting crazy ridiculous, like with a really long barrel, is fairly concealable. You can conceal a 4-inch barrel, medium frame, 357 Magnum. They also make the 38 Special 357 Magnum shot shells, and I think these are a little bit better than the 9mm flavor. You can load them yourself. You can load them with whatever size shot that you want if you load them yourself, buying the shot capsules and loading them as a hand loader. But they're more now available than there used to be. You can get the standard, which I think are blue, and the larger shot, which I think is red. These aren't great, but again, there is some real application, I think, where these shot shells for a handgun would be applicable, and I think the 38 357s work better than the 9mm. And again, going back to that advantage, since you're not worried about it being able to cycle the gun, you could load up, let's say, half a cylinder of these and half a cylinder of regular defensive loads. Come across small game close up, you could take it. and you could get more than one shot. Or you could keep all your rounds except for one loaded with your standard defensive loads, because again, I think that's the primary purpose of a handgun. But let's say you see a rat or a rattlesnake. You know how to use a revolver and which way your revolver goes. Smith & Wesson goes counterclockwise, Colt goes clockwise. Right? You could unlock that cylinder, spin it once the wrong way, and dispatch that rat or that rattlesnake, and still have your defensive loads ready to go. Basically, you would have a good 5 or 6 shot, depending on the capacity of the revolver, .357 Magnum defensive gun with one very small single shot shotgun. There's a lot of utility there. There's a lot of advantages to a revolver in this kind of scenario. What if .357 Magnum is just not beefy enough for you? Well, there is the .44 Magnum, and I wouldn't advise these because, again, the primary role concealed carry. Most .44 Magnums are going to be too big to generally conceal carry. I'm not saying you can't, and in this situation, right of trials and tribulations, I would say you probably want to dress around your gun even more. Probably not worried about if your shirt makes you look fat in this kind of environment. So, although I wouldn't advise it day to day, a .44 Magnum, there are a couple. The Smith & Wesson 69, which is a 5-shot and much svelter than many other .44 Magnums, that will be a decent choice. Smith & Wesson Model 29, it's a little bit slimmer. You get into the Red Hawk and the Super Red Hawk, they're phenomenal guns built like tanks. They're quite a bit heavier, but for this application, again, if you want to dress around it, a good gun. .44 Magnum it's not the most powerful handgun on earth, but it is very powerful, and it will certainly take anything in North America with the right load. If you understand loads and ballistics and bullet construction, you could have a .357 Magnum load that can outperform a .44 Magnum load, but if you're wise in both choices, the .44 Magnum is better for large game. It just is. It's got more power. And although I said I would hunt anything in North America with a .357 Magnum, and I would, it gives more opportunity and more range, I think, with a .44 Magnum. There are shots that I ethically just wouldn't take with a .357 that I would with a .44. With a good, let's say, hard cast, 310 grain, gas-checked, semi-wad cutter, .44 mag, I would shoot a deer head on. I would shoot a deer going straight away from me with that load, because I know the penetration that load has. If it was a good shot and I called that shot and it was a good one, I would take that shot. I wouldn't take that shot with a .357 Magnum. And if you're trying to put meat on the table, you might just be presented with that shot. If you're moving from one place to another, a deer's tail up in the air bounding away from you may be the shot that you get. And if I'm being honest, I think the .44 Magnum is a better large game round than a .357 Magnum. But you give up quite a bit. Mostly for this, I think you give up weight of ammo. The .44 Magnum is a heavy gun. And the .44 Magnum ammo is heavy. Right? It's quite a bit heavier than 9mm. Certainly way heavier than 22, heavier than for the .357, so it's heavy. And you give up the ability to shoot fast. I don't care how strong you are. I don't care if you're the Paul Bunyan of gunfighters. I don't care how good you control recoil. If there's less of it, the gun returns back on target faster. That's just physics. Give me that same Paul Bunyan gunfighter, and I give him almost identical guns except for caliber. Let's say a Glock 17 and a Glock 22, one's in 9 and one's in 40. I put a plate up at 7 yards, and I say, hit that as many times as you can. And he's a well-trained gunfighter. He knows how to call his shots and how to ride recoil. He's going to get more shots in, let's say, 2 seconds with the 9 than with the 40. Because, again, I don't care how good you control recoil. If you reduce it, you can shoot and return that gun on target faster. Same thing applies here with the .44 Magnum. It's a powerful handgun. There is no free lunch. You have to deal with that recoil. You can, however, load down. There is the .44 Special. Not nearly as common as .38 Special, but it's a thing. It exists, and it's not a bad defensive caliber. If you hand load it and load it down, if you loaded it to really light velocities in, let's say, a wad cutter, there would be worse things for small game hunting. I don't think it will be as good as many other choices, but it still gives you some flexibility in that. I'll briefly mention 45 long Colt. It's a good round, especially if you hand load. Pretty much whatever I said about the 44 Magnum, you could load up and down with the 45 long Colt. It is also a good round. One cool thing they make for the cylinders of 45, and I believe 44 as well, are cylinder conversions, and these are quite unique. Basically, they look like a 44 mag bullet or a 45 long Colt bullet that you put a 22 round into, allowing your gun to shoot 22 long rifle. I don't believe they're anywhere near as accurate as a dedicated 22 or even a 22 upper conversion kit. If we go back to like the rat, vermin, really up close kind of stuff, that is also an intriguing option. They don't weigh very much. Could have your 44 mag, your 45 long Colt with, 6 of these small conversions and 100 rounds of ammo, 22 ammo, or 200 rounds of 22 ammo. They wouldn't take up a lot of space. Again, I don't think because of the nature of how they work, right, they're just kind of going through the barrel. They're not using the rifling to spin the bullet. So whatever little bit of stability they get from the length of the cartridge, I certainly wouldn't think they'd be as accurate as a dedicated 22, but they are a thing that exists. And if you wanted to add some utility, again, this is about maximizing your handgun for survival. If you decide, I'm going to be the Dirty Harry of the wasteland, you might consider one of those 22 cylinder inserts. All right, now let's talk about the wild card. This is a wild card. I thought about this working out at the gym this morning when I was taking a few notes for this episode. And that is the black powder revolver. Yeah, I said wild card. Go with me down this deep, dark rabbit hole of the apocalypse. You can easily make your own black powder. It's not hard to do. It's 3 main ingredients. And you even get to pee on it. How cool is that? But in all seriousness, you can make your own black powder. It's not that hard. I'm not going to get into how to do that. I don't know whether that is or is not allowed per the ATF, but if you want to figure it out, you can figure it out. So you can make your own black powder. Percussion caps weigh very, very little. You're talking about the fraction of the weight of a 22 long rifle. You could carry enough percussion caps in a pack that you probably won't even notice the difference, and it probably lasts you the rest of your adult life. And if you know what you're doing, you can reuse those and make new compounds for that as well. So if you talk about really long term, the common black powder revolvers. I say revolver because it gives you a reasonable rate of fire if you practice with them. If you're going center fire from jump, I would encourage you to get a double action, single action, a DASA revolver, like a modern combat revolver. But if you're going this route, you're, talking about mostly single action guns. They also, this is why it's a wild card, you can make your own rounds, you can cast your own lead bullets, make your own powder. I have to imagine in the apocalypse, salvaging lead will not be that hard from old pipes, from old car batteries, from old wheel weights. In fact, my father, when we were younger, we used to cast bullets out of wheel weights because it had some linotite, I believe, that makes it a little bit harder, talking about those hard cast bullets. You could have a bullet mold in your pack. A Lee or Lyman bullet mold doesn't weigh very much. So you can pretty much make your own. And here's the thing. This is why it's kind of cool as a wild card. For many of these common, again, going back to why it's important to have a common platform, they make cylinder conversion kits. So you could convert a lot of these to a center fire modern handgun, right? You could convert them to a modern 45 long Colt. If you had a 45 caliber black powder, you could convert it with a cylinder conversion and have a center fire good round with all the advantages of being, more impervious to the elements, the reliability, all those things. And something like a 45 long Colt, again, is a good round. You could have that. You could have those 22 conversion things. I'm not sure that they would work with this, but they very well may. You might want to double check that. Going way down that rabbit hole, if you got the cylinder conversion, which is certainly a thing, could you get the 22 cylinder inserts and still have that work? You're kind of stacking stuff up there. I'm not sure how much I would trust that unless I train with it a lot, but it is an intriguing option. Also, the 22 or as I was, the black powder revolvers are not considered firearms. You can have them shipped right to your door. You can go buy them without any of the rigmarole and restrictions. It's an intriguing option. It is an intriguing option. That's why I put it in here as a wild card. Just a thought on maximizing handguns for survival. Here's what I'm going to end with before we get into the normal conclusions, tactical tip, tactical verse. You know how you really maximize your handgun for survival? You train with it. You dry fire. You're comfortable with it. You use it. You have ammunition that you've tested to be reliable in your gun when fired by you, that shoots point of aim, point of impact by you, that you can pick up in the middle of the night and clear any malfunction that's common that it might have. Sounds like a broken part, but a double feed, a failure to fire, you can pick it up in the middle of the night, half awake, and clear that malfunction without even thinking about it. That's how you really maximize your handgun for survival. Train with it. Be good with it. Master the fundamentals with it. That's exponentially more important than what model of gun you have. With that, the tactical tip of the day. Talking about this. If you were going to have one thing in your pack to take care of your gun as far as a gun cleaning, gun lubricant solution, you might choose CLP, and there's a lot of merit to that. You may also choose Ballistol. And I don't often recommend a product for a tactical tip. I try and not to, but Ballistol is so good. It's been around so long. Ballistol is good for all kinds of things. You can make some kind of concoction, often referred to as moose milk in the black powder circles, but you can mix it with water to make it go a little bit farther and kind of use it as a good rinse for your gun and then put some straight Ballistol on it. Ballistol is good for cleaning. It's okay for lubrication. It's not the best. And here's the kicker. If you're talking about for survival, it's also useful for cleaning wounds. And again, going back to guns and knives kill people, but disease and parasites and pestilence kill a lot more people throughout history and almost certainly post-event. Good for cleaning wounds. Ballistol. May want some of that in your kit. Clean your gun, clean your wounds, and here is kind of a bonus. It smells really good, at least to me. It smells like anise. No, not the other word that sounds like that. Anise. Anise, if you don't know, is a thing that smells like black licorice. I really like that smell. So, thankfully, by God's grace, I am married to a wonderful wife. But if you're single roaming around the apocalypse, splash a little bit of that Ballistol on your neck. The ladies are like, he's got a cool gun. He smells really good. You get what I'm saying there. Ballistol. Good tactical tip of the day. Anyway, with that, how about the tactical verse of the day? I'm just going to read you from Leviticus 19. Whether you're in the apocalypse or not, your morals shouldn't change because right and wrong doesn't change. God's law doesn't change because God does not change. He says, I change not. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Let's look at a little bit of Leviticus 19. You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. In righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go about as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor, and not bear sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people. But you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. You shall keep my statutes. Leviticus 19. Whether it's left of event or right of event, be a good, moral, godly, God-fearing man. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.